Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of our Christie Terra webinar series. I'm joined today with Tom Bocker, who's going to be my wingman for today's webinar, as he's been doing for the past couple of webinars as well. So, morning, Tom.
Good morning, Nick.
I'm Nick Weeder, and a couple of things. You can ask questions. There's a little question tool that you'll be able to use throughout the presentation. Don't hesitate to do that. Tom will be answering some of them maybe on the chat during the presentation, during the webinars, and then at the end we'll try and go through more of some of the more sort of general questions so everyone can profit from that. Okay, so yeah, let's get started. So today is going to be on a live demo of the Terra Manager. So part 1, just going to overview what we part 1 and part 2. So part 1 we went through what Terra is, which is a way of transmitting video and audio and RS-232 and USB and data over a 10 gigabyte network and the different applications that you can use Terra for. Part 2, we went into the different operating modes, the RX and the TX. We got a little bit of an overview on the networking side and how to manage the network with Terra. It's not really rocket science, and I think a lot of you were there already. And today, part 3, we're going to go into the Terra Manager. So that's the software that's used to control the Terra controller, control the whole system actually, configure and use it. So we'll go through the configuration mode, how you set the system up, and the operation mode, how to use it, to display sources on destinations and so on. We'll go through different settings and a couple of things on the XY HTML page and the JSON API test that will help you just make sure that you can control the system. You can actually test the API from the controller, from the laptop, when you're using third-party controls. And then we'll finish up with some questions as usual. So to be able to do this, I've actually got this set up. We're always, all of us are working from home at the moment, so I've actually got this demo kit set up at home. I've got 4 Terra TX. So when I mention TX, it's a transmitter. Okay, TX is a transmitter. I have 4 TX and 4 RX, 4 receivers, a controller, and my laptop, on which I'm running the Terra Manager. And I've got a Netgear M4300 8x8 10 gig switch. I've got 4 twin-ax copper SFP plus cables going from the TX to the switch, and then I've got some OM3 fiber going from the switch to the RX. The Netgear is standard out of the box. There's no configuration required on that. I didn't go into it, didn't touch it at all. So it's really simple. It's plug and play with SDVoE, which is great. The Terra controller is connected to the switch just over standard Cat5, cable. Nothing special about that. It doesn't require 10 gig or fiber or anything like that. And the same thing for my laptop. So the first steps of actually of setting the controller up is to obviously connect all the devices to the network switch. Then you power up the devices and the switch, and you let the switch power up completely. So it takes a little longer for the switch to power up than your devices to. And then you turn on the controller. You'll need to install the Terra Manager software on the control PC and launch the manager. And then I'm actually going to go and show you how we're going to configure the controller IP and then start and go through the system's configuration. So to set the controller up, this is what you get when you start the Terra Manager software. So on the left-hand side, you'll get the Terra Startup Assistant, and then the sign-in, the login sort of box there to use. And the first thing you do is you want to go to the Terra Startup Assistant, because the controller doesn't have a fixed IP address. It's actually in DHCP mode. Okay, so you need to give it a fixed IP address. So when you click on the Terra Startup Assistant, you'll get a window will appear, the window on the right-hand side of this slide, and the software will actually go out and discover the Terra controller. So it'll find its MAC address, it'll show the version of the software that it's running, and when you click on Configure, the blue button there, you'll have the initial controller settings appear on the right-hand side. Now, all of those, at least the first three, will be blank. So I actually entered 192.168.1.200 as the fixed IP address I want for the controller, with the subnet mask 255.255.0.0, and I'll go into a little bit later on why I actually used that particular subnet mask. Then the gateway IP address. I gave the controller a name, and I chose the time zone I'm in. So I'm in the Paris time, so UTC +1. You then hit save, and the controller will reboot. And on the front panel, you'll see beforehand you would have seen the MAC address appear on the front panel. And after reboot, you'll see its fixed IP address. So the next step is actually to sign into the controller now. And so you'll need to close the Startup Assistant. And the first time you sign in, the login and password is service. You'll find that in the user manual. And the first time you sign in, it will prompt you for a new password. You will not be able to keep service login, the username and old password. So it will prompt you for a new password on the first attempt. And once you've done that, then we can. It'll actually open up the software. It'll actually prompt you to log in again with the new password. So once you've done that, we'll end up something like this, okay? And you'll come to this page here, okay? So it looks pretty empty. On the left-hand side, these are the receivers that it sees on the network. The receivers haven't been set up at all. They're also in DHCP mode. And the first thing we're going to do is create a display array. Okay, so we've got 4 receivers here. So I'm just going to create a 2x2. I'm going to call it display array. So you can give it a name here. Just correct that. And you can choose the number of columns and rows that you want. So if you just have a single projector, it would obviously be 1 column and 1 row. And you can go down here and select different resolutions that you want. Okay, so I'm just going to do 1080p. I don't actually have any source or any displays connected to the system today. Down here, the next these boxes here are for bezel compensation when you're using flat panels. So that's in pixels. So you can cater for the gap between the panels if there is one. And then you just hit create, and you get something like this. So you can see the 2x2 array, its name here. And if you click the expand button down here, now you can see the 2x2 array. And all that you need to do is just drag and drop the receivers into each of the respective destinations. So you can see the receiver here. It has the It's the device name right now is its MAC address. You'll see the MAC address on a sticker on the front of the unit. So you'll be able to identify it. And pretty much, so you'll need to know which receiver is connected to which quadrant, of course. And once you do that, then the receiver is actually going to output 1920 by 1080. If I did a 2x2 array in 4K, then just by dragging and dropping the receiver into the array, then receiver would get configured to output 4K. Simple as that. Now, the next thing we want to do is to actually set up the IP addresses. Now, this is really simple. Now, I've only got 8 devices here, so I can actually do it manually. But if you've got a lot of them, then the system will actually do that by itself. So on the left-hand side, you have, I can actually give a start IP range and an end IP range that I want the devices to be in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify that and start that at 110 and go down here and modify this and put 1.150. Okay. The subnet mask, I'm going to keep at 255.255.0.0. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to select just the transmitters now and hit allocate IP to selected devices. So what this will do is that you can see the IP addresses in the center here. They're all HTTP addresses, and there's only one of them. Each device actually needs 2 IP addresses. It'll need a second one for the USB. And you can see it's actually creating IP addresses for all of them. So now they're actually rebooting, and hopefully we'll see all of them come up again with 2 IP addresses. And those are automatically assigned by the controller. One of the really nice things about Terra. So while that's happening, we go back here and select one of these. On the right-hand side, the receiver properties here. There are different output modes that you can select. I went through those in the preceding webinar, and which are still online. So fast switch, genlock, and genlock scaling, and so on. And the display array properties with the number of columns and rows and so on. Let's go back here and see what the devices are doing, and it's been successful. So now the transmitters both have 2 IP addresses, one for everything but USB, and a second one specifically for USB routing. Now, the reason I gave the subnet mask, I created a subnet mask of 255.255.0.0, is that you can actually give a different IP range. So if I wanted to differentiate in the IP tables between transmitters and receivers, I could go here and just put 2. Okay, and select all the receivers, and it hits allocate IPs to selected devices again. So we're going to do this again, and now it's going to do exactly the same thing with the receivers, but the IP addresses is going to be 192.168.2.110, but because the subnet mask is 255.255.0.0, the controller is still going to see everyone, it's going to be able to manage everyone. So while that's happening, there we go, up again. And you can see that was successful now. So now each of the Terra devices, the TX and the RX, now have fixed IP addresses. We can go on to the next step. I can show you what the EDA Manager does. So what the EDA Manager does, you can actually select a transmitter, which would be connected to a source. So again, the source can be HDMI or DisplayPort 2.0. There are two connectors on the transmitters, two inputs on the transmitters. And you can go down here and select an EDID from the factory default list to apply, or you can import an EDID from a file you can create. So the compatible EDID files is .edid, .dat, and .text files. Or what's actually really cool is that you can actually go and select an EDID file from a receiver that is connected to a display. So what you're doing there is actually grabbing the EDID file from the display and applying it to the transmitter. So, as I haven't got anything, I haven't got any sources or any displays here at home, we're going to skip to the next part, which is audio. And again, you can select one or more of the transmitters and also receivers to be able to configure these at the same time. So you don't need to select each transmitter one after the other. So I'll just show you the different, the different possibilities here. So audio input mode, you can select between two-channel or the analog audio, which is the mini jack inputs, or you can select HDMI, so the audio on the HDMI, and the mini jack in that case is actually a loop out, so it becomes an output, and it will output the HDMI signal that is coming into that particular input. So you can select between those two. And on the receiver end, it's a little bit different. You've got a little bit more. You can select between two-channel analog audio, which again is the mini jack output, HDMI audio downmix, which also is the default setting, and it will also output on the analog output, on the mini jack output. Multi-channel HDMI audio, actually the last three, so multi-channel HDMI audio, the HDMI downmix and analog audio, and multi-channel and analog audio all outputs on the HDMI output, and also the analog mini jack output as well. So once you choose something, you can either save individually, or if you select all of them, you can save all down here, and it will apply those settings to all of the receivers. The next thing that we can go and configure, so I'm going to discard all again, is RS-232. And then again, you can choose all of the transmitters and go down here and decide on the baud rates. So the higher the baud rate is, the shorter the distances that you can actually use on the serial cable. So you can choose the baud rate, data bit, the data bit, the stop bit, and the parity, and so on, and do exactly the same thing on the receiver as well. Okay, and then again, if you do it individually, you can save it individually to one or two receivers or multiple receivers, or save all again down here when you've chosen all of them. Okay, very, very easy to use. So I'm just going to cancel all, and we'll go to USB. So again, USB, once again, you can choose everything, or just one transmitter and one receiver, for example. And down here, you can filter the type of USB data that you want to, or signal that you want to allow on the network. So the first one is allow all, which is default. So any USB device connected to a transmitter will be pushed through over the network. If you select block all except HID devices, only HID devices will be allowed. So an HID device. There'll be a keyboard or a touch panel, a touch screen, a mouse, things like that. Human interface device. Okay, you can allow everything except for mass storage devices. Okay, so you can block mass storage devices, and you can also block everything except for HID and smart card. So you know, smart card access, smart card devices. So you can use that for you know, for secure access to, you know, different devices on the network. So that's on the transmitter side, and there's exactly the same thing on the receiver end as well. So moving across on the devices summary, this, when you click on the devices, you actually get, actually there should be 4 of them here, 8 of them here. That's strange. Anyway, you'll actually see the summary of, you know, the different, so the audios and what the button does and so on and so forth. In the devices, I'm going to go back to devices setup now and just run through the tabs down here. So on the network tab shows the mask and the gateway. The inputs, you can select between HMI DisplayPort or automatic. So the last one that gets connected is the live one. You can enable or disable HDCP, and if you click down here, you can so that's HDCP 1.4 and 2.2, and you can disable HDCP 2.2 if you want to. On the buttons here, on the front of the GX, there are 2 buttons. The right-hand button can be used to switch between the video inputs, switch between the DisplayPort 1.2 and the HDMI input. On the LED tab, you can actually get the LEDs to blink at the same time to be able to identify a device when it's, you know, you've got many of them racked up. So if you want to be able to identify a specific transmitter or receiver, then you can get the LEDs to blink. So you do that and then save up here and they'll start blinking, and then to turn it off, you just go back to default function for this and then hit save up there to get it back to usual. The hardware here, now this is something that's this actually pretty good, very interesting. The swap devices here will permit you to swap a device that is being used in a layout or a preset. So if you need to swap out a device that has a problem, that's failed or something like that, then you can connect a new device to the network and give it an IP address and so on. And then you can go down here and it will swap. You can actually go and choose the device that you've just connected. So you can see it's got its MAC address here. You can choose a MAC address that you want to use in place of the failed unit. And the great advantage of that is that you won't have to redo all your presets. It will actually, you know, you can use the layouts that you've already created. You won't have to go and reprogram anything. So you just select the new device, and if you want to delete the original from the list, you can hit this box here and then just hit swap. It's as easy as that. You can then, you know, later on, you can delete the device that you want as well. And the XY index here is a unique sort of ID. It's a number between 1 and, you know, as the number of TX that you have on the network, and that's used for the XY for the XY HTML interface that I'll be showing later on. Firmware. This is how you can update the firmware on the devices. So again, you can select all of them or just one of them, all the devices or just a single device or certain devices. There are two versions available, two versions of the firmware available by default. The version that we're using is 3.6. Currently, if you are using the TSIP card, the Terra SDVoE input card on one of our projectors, then you will need to be running the version 3.3 for that on the network. If there is an updated software version of the Terra Manager with an updated maybe 4.0, for example, on the firmware version, it's very easy to do. You would need to update the controller first. So you just install the new manager software on your laptop, and you then sort of log into the Terra controller. When you do that, the software will see the difference in version between the new version that's running on your laptop and the version that's running on the controller, and will prompt you to choose if you want to update the controller or not. And then it will just, the controller, if you confirm that, then the controller would update itself, and you can go down here into the firmware, so devices set up in firmware, and select the new firmware version for all the devices. If you get a firmware update in form of a file, then that you've got on your laptop or the control PC, then you can go and browse here and go and grab the update file. So once you've done that, you save either here, or if you've chosen all of them, you can go down and save all down here, and that will automatically update all of the devices. Now, groups, that's something that can be useful. You can group transmitters, and you can group receivers, and you can also group layouts as well. So you can have groups for different rooms, for example, or different types of sources and so on. If you want to create a new group, you can just create its name and create. And then let's just put one of them in here. New group, whoops. Create, and then just save this one. And now you can actually put that into that particular group. So you can call the groups, as I said, types of sources or types of transmitters, or where the transmitter is and so on, or what floor it's on, or whatever you like. And it's also the same for the receivers. So on the receiver side, you've got pretty much the same thing. So the network things, you've got the buttons. Now the button on the receiver end by default is none. However, if you do this, send EDID, what that does, it broadcasts the EDID across the network. So it's useful in it's actually used when you're doing point-to-point. So if you've got just a transmitter and a receiver without going through a switch, so that they're connected directly using fiber, then you can hit the EDID, hit the button on the front of the receiver, and it will send the EDID file to the transmitter. So the EDID from the display that it's connected to. So by default, that is none. It's not. You want to be careful on using that if you've got the the receiver connected to a network, because that will actually broadcast that to all the transmitters. Again, you've got the LED function to be able to identify the receivers. You've got the same swap devices, delete devices, and XY index on the for the receivers as well, and you've got the same function for the update. Also down here on the left-hand side, you can export the list of transmitters and receivers in a CSV format to create labels and so on. And then once you've done that, you can import the list again in a .csv format to assign names and so on. One final thing is that up here you can give these names as well. Now the system, so that's TX2, the system will actually always identify the transmitters and receivers using MAC addresses. So it doesn't matter if so let's call this TX4. Then on the right hand side, I'm going to do the same again, RX1. RX2, RX3, and RX4. So let's just save that. Oops. No, that the one didn't take it. TX3. There we go. And that one. There we go. So you can give them names to be able to easily identify the source and the display, but the system uses the MAC address as an identifier when you're using the API and so on. It always uses the MAC address. These three buttons here, if you click here, you can refresh the device. It just refreshes the information, IP addresses and so on. You can reboot it. You can toggle the blink on and off, and you can copy the configuration to a different device as well. And you've got the same thing over here for the receivers as well. So it's a really simple thing to do. It's really easy to use, easy to set up. Down here on the right-hand side, you'll see different colors here. So you've got, depending on what's going on. So if the IPs are JCP, then there'll be sort of this yellow ochre color, like they were when we started up. Green is running, so it's actually seeing everything. So the system's actually, the control's actually seeing all the TX and the RX. If there's an error or it's disconnected, then it'll go red and it'll be a cross. So it's a very visual and very easy way of finding out if something's going wrong. So that's pretty much the configuration done. So we have a 2x2 array here. So the next thing is to go into the operations mode. And you can see, it's interesting. Let's go back here. So that's TX2. We've got two groups. So it's TX1. Let's go here. Devices TX1. It may not have. Okay, let's try to save all and go back here. Okay, for some reason it's not picking up the TX1 here, but you can see the two groups. So there are two TX in one group and two TX in the other group. And if you click down here, you can select the different types of signals that you want to be able to route when you start using the transmitters. So you can choose between video and audio, infrared, either one way or the other. So full duplex to the RX, from the RX, and the same thing for the RS-232, and USB, which is always point to point. Again, you can do that for everything. So, and you can create, new groups and so on and so forth. Very easy to do. So, the way that we're going, in the center here, you can see the display array, and you'd have a list. So if you'd have more than one destination, we've got a video wall here, a 2x2 video wall, then you'd see, you'd see a list of these running down here. And to be able to start displaying content, all you need to do is to expand it, hit the expand button on the right-hand side. Okay, and you can see the different RX here. And then it's as simple as just dragging and dropping a source into a window. So I'm just going to choose, let's go to new group and grab these guys and put them down here. Okay, so now I have a source in each quadrant. So it'll be a source displayed full screen on each of these flat panels. And over here in the mode, you'll notice that this little button here is to the right and preview is green. So it's right now, I've created layout, but it hasn't been applied to the system yet. To apply it, you need to push to display. And once you do that, then the receiver, each receiver will go and subscribe to the transmitter that I dropped into each quadrant. Okay, and you can save that as a layout. So if I save that as a new layout, I'm going to call that layout 1. Okay, save that. And now over here, you can see in the Layouts tab, again, you can see that it's layout 1 has appeared, and you can create as many as you like. So over here, if I want to change things around, then you can hit Clear All Sources, and then go back to Transmitters, take a single source, drag it into the screen, and then drag that across to cover the whole of the wall, and then push to display. And what that is going to do is that it'll take the source from transmitter 2 and display that full screen in Genlock wall mode. You can see down here on the right-hand side in the properties panel, Genlock wall. So when you do that, the receivers are Genlocked together, so there won't be any sort of drifting between the quadrants. And you push to display, and again, you can save that as a new layout. Let's call that, I don't know, full screen TX2, for example, and save that. And then you can go back here to the layouts, and you can see that full screen TX2 has appeared here. But you can actually jump between layouts as well. So if you want to go back to layout 1, then hit apply. And see this happens, push to display, and you've switched between TX2 full screen to 4 different sources, 4 separate sources in each quadrant. And again, you can go backwards and forwards. Push to display, and that's now on the screen. If I were to do that in live mode, Okay, when you go back to transmitter and you drop something in, so let's go to root and say TX4 and drop that in here, it will switch automatically immediately on the screen live. And you notice that push to display button on the right hand side here is grayed out. You're actually using the software live now. So as you go through, as you drag and drop a source in or a transmitter in, it's switching immediately on the screen. Okay. Again, you can save that as a new layout. So that's full screen TX3. Save that, and that is now yet another layout. It's really easy to use. So anyway, let's go back to preview mode. I'm going to clear all the sources. And so you've noticed that the RX, the receivers that are connected to the video wall are actually changing modes between layouts. So you know, when you've got a single source that's full screen, it's in a general wall mode. When you've got a single source in each quadrant, it can be in general or fast switch mode. So, you know, the layout actually memorizes the mode that is required on the receiver side for what you need to do. And one of those modes is Multiviewer. Excuse me. So, to do this, you can enter, if you just select one of the quadrants. So I'm going to select the top left-hand side and enter multi-view mode. And here you can see it's a 2x2 array, but what I'm looking at now is just the top left quadrant, okay? You can select the number of segments that you want to have, okay? So let's say, I don't know, a 3x3, for example. So you've got 9 different segments. There are two things. A snap to grid here will take a source and sort of fit it into the grid, either in a single segment or across a 2x2. And if you hit this, it will keep the aspect ratio of the source. If you've got I don't know, a 4x3 source or something like that, it will keep that aspect ratio, and just it won't stretch the aspect ratio to the grid. Okay, so to be able to use that, again, you go back to the transmitters and you take a source and drag it in here, TX3. So TX4, TX3, and we'll go to new group and just grab the other two. And you can continue using these. So what is happening, what is going to happen with this is that the receiver is going to subscribe to the stream 1, to the scale version of each transmitter. Okay, so if I go to push to display, the receiver is going to, the system is going actually to tell each transmitter that stream 1 needs to be 640 pixels wide by 360 pixels high. You can see the size here, the width and the height of each of these windows. So that's the resolution of of stream 1 for each that's going to be applied to stream 1 of each of the transmitters. They're all the same size here. Okay, and the receiver is going to subscribe to those, and it can subscribe to, you know, multiple instances. I mean, not that, you know, it's a very useful thing to do, but as you can see, I've got, you know, TX3 3 times on the wall, and if you hit push to display, that is what's going to happen. And if you leave multi-view now, you can see that the top left-hand quadrant is in multi-view mode. You can see all the different sources, so it's got 9 layers, but you can still use the other sources full screen. And you can create a layout as well. So these sources here, the TX4, TX3, TX2, those are stream 1 sources, stream 0 sources. So I have to correct myself. And the sources that are being used in Multiview are stream 1. And you can save that as the layout as well. So let's Multiview 1, for example, and save that. And again, if you go back to layouts, you'll see Multiview 1's appeared down here. But if we go back to layout 1 and push to display, so layout 1 is this, go push to display, and now the display, your video wall is displaying the four different sources on the wall. And if you go to, and you can see that they're in fast switch mode, each one is in fast switch mode. If you go to this layout here, the Multiview 1 layout that I've just created, and apply that. My network's a little bit slow this morning. Here we go. And hit push to display again. Now, what we're seeing on the video wall is this with a Multiviewer. And you could, if I select this guy, then you can see that that the mode is in multi-view mode, and this one is actually in fast switch. Okay, so you can change the mode very easily and create as many layouts as you like and recall them. Now, the one button that I haven't used yet is Save Layout. And if I want to modify something, so let's take this off the screen and go here and enter and take another source, let's say TX2, for example, and drop that in here. Okay, so TX2. I was actually applying a layout there. My mistake. So we've got this. And if I wanted to save the layout, so I was here. If I wanted to save this layout now, or modify the layout that I'm actually using. So let's just recall. Let's do this. Let's recall Multiviewer 1. Okay, so we've got TX4. Let's do this right. Push to display. So that's now on the screen. And then if I want to go and I'm going to go back to transmitters so I don't make the same mistake again, and then take out TX4, replace it with this guy, and then go push to display, and then save layout. Then if I hit Multiviewer 1, you see I've just modified layout Multiviewer 1 where TX4 was actually up here on the top right hand side. So save layout is used to modify an existing layout, and save as new layout actually creates a new one. So there we are. Very, very simple to use. Now concerning the Multiviewer, let's go back here and clear all sources. Okay, you can the Multiviewer can have windows to different sizes. So if you wanted to say display transmitter 2 in this size, and then just have the other ones in a smaller array. Let's go and grab these guys. Root, TX4, TX3, and just display that. Then you can actually do that. So push to display, leave Multiviewer. So we're back to visualizing the whole of the video wall now, and I can save that as a new layout. Multiview 2. And you can jump between Multiviewer 1 and push the display, and then also go back to Multiview 2.
Nick, it's me, Tom.
Yes, Tom.
Talking about layouts, would you mind showing that it is possible to have layouts with different features? So we're creating layouts with video, audio, RS-232 being used, but we can change that from layout to layout, right? It doesn't have to be activated all the time.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, right now everything's ticked on these layouts. You can select what you want to send. So it's really simple to use. And also on the transmitter side, you also select what you want to send. Okay, so if you, for example, if you wanted audio on TX3 down the right-hand side here, so you've got the audio signal from transmitter 3 that you want to output on the bottom right-hand receiver, then you would tick audio on the transmitter, obviously. And when you drag that into the display and then push to display, or if you're actually running it live, then it would switch automatically, of course, but then the audio would also follow as well.
Perfect. And this can be stored separately in each layout. This is not stored on the transmitter.
Yeah, so each layout, yes. So
layout.
the layout sort of memorizes not just the way that the video is switched and the modes are recalled, but also memorizes what type of signal is being routed to which transmitter. So whether it's audio, infrared, RS-232, or USB as well. So if you're in an environment where you're using like a third-party controller and want to be able to, for example, route the USB independently using the API, then you would make sure that you would not have USB routed, in the layouts. Because if it was, then every time you recall a layout, then the USB will be routed, maybe differently from what you actually want the API to do. The type of data that you want to sort of route in a layout must only be the signals that you actually want to be able to use on the video wall itself. Okay, so again, if you've got a control room, for example, and you've recalled a layout on your video wall, but you've got a receiver at each sort of control position, and you want to be able to use KVM, then you want to make sure that, for example, that USB is not ticked on the layouts that you're using for the video wall. Otherwise, the USB would be routed to the video wall instead of one of the control positions in the control room. So it's pretty much common sense. I mean, it's really not difficult at all. But one thing that I wanted to go back to is this guy up here. I want to the Multiviewer, just to finish up here. Is this guy. So again, you can see the window's slightly bigger. It's 1280 by 720. So the TX2, the stream 0 on TX2 is actually that resolution. But again, like I mentioned in the preceding webinars, it's at half the frame rate. So on these transmitters, the stream 0 resolution is 640 by 360. On TX2, it's 1280 by 720. There can only ever be one single stream 1 from a source at any one time, so it's going to be a single size. So you can't have a multiviewer or several multiviewers, for example, with you know, TX2 transmitter 2, for example, in 2 different sizes. Okay. You can only publish it in a single size at any one time. So it's really pretty straightforward. It's very, very easy to use. Again, on the right-hand side, you know, you can there are things you can select. You know, you've got the properties panel. Obviously, the resolution. This is the input resolution on the transmitter, and because I've got nothing connected to any of the transmitters, I don't have any sources here at home, then it's 0, 0. But what you would see here is the resolution that's picking up from the source. Okay. Allow full frame rate. If you tick that, then you get full frame rate on stream. You can actually force full frame rate on stream 1, but you need to be careful that stream 0 and stream 1 don't go above the 10 GB bandwidth. Okay, so you would not be able to use, for example, full frame rate on, you know, resolutions of like 1080. Sorry, on 720p or higher, for example, when you're using UHD or 4K sources, for example. You need to keep in mind that you've got 10 gigabytes worth of bandwidth on the output of the transmitter. Sorry. Okay, when you're using, you know, stream 0 and stream 1. And going down here, you can change the output mode sort of on the fly between fast switch and genlock scaling. And then when you do that, you can actually choose let's see, multiview mode. Yes. So if I do this, you can use custom. You can use. You can select. You know, standard resolutions, or use a custom value, which you can enter a horizontal and vertical resolution and its frame rate, what you want to do with the aspect ratio, if you want it stretched to whatever the receiver resolution is, or whether you want it cropped to the receiver resolution, or whether you want to keep whatever the source is, to keep the aspect ratio of the source. And then just hit change to apply it as well. So this is just the basic information here of what's going on, of the audio, and you can see the windows and the here you've actually got the IDs. So you see is using the MAC address of each of what's in each of the windows in the on the displays, and you can still go in and modify the bezel compensation, so on and so forth, if you need to. There, so it's pretty straightforward. So that's pretty much the operation mode of the Terra transmitter. It's actually it's sort of embarrassingly simple to use, pretty much. So the next thing I want to show you is the global settings. Now, the global settings. The first thing I did when I logged into the controller, when I set up the IP address, I went into global settings, and on external control down here, I just ticked everything, including VNC. So I'll go through these in a minute, but that's the first thing I actually did. This enables the JSON API, the XY switcher API as well, the web server as well, which I'll be showing you shortly, and also VNC. It enables VNC access to the controller, which is very useful for troubleshooting the system, you know, for technical support and so on and so forth. You can also enable RS-232, you know, the JSON API, the XY switcher RS-232, if you want to use that rather than over IP. And the fast switch wall, you can enable the fast switch wall mode, which enables a slightly cleaner switch in wall mode for the sources. and but the receivers, but the receivers in that wall mode may not be completely synced with receivers that are not in wall mode, as it were, on the system. On the left-hand side, again, you've got the controller name, its IP address, the subnet mask, and the controller and the gateway, and so on. And down here, you can enable the backup controller. So again, if you have a backup controller, when you go to the Terra Startup Assistant, you will it will discover both controllers. So you will have to give both controllers an IP address. And then the first thing you would do when you connect to the controller that you've chosen as the main controller, you would go here, tick this box, and just enter the IP of the backup controller. Now, what happens when you have a backup controller is that they will talk to each other. The backup controller will talk regularly with the main controller, and the configuration actually gets saved to both controllers at the same time. So the layouts and the TX and the RX configurations and so on, they get saved to both controllers. If the backup controller doesn't hear from the main controller after a certain amount of time, then it will actually take control. And all you'll need to do is to log out of the main controller and log into the backup controller. Over here, you can enable the network time protocol server if you're using that, or you can select the time zone that you're using, and so on. The time's not set correctly here. On the right-hand side, there are certain features that you can use as well. So a backup configuration creates a backup file. So so you can create a backup file of the whole configuration. You can restore a configuration, so you can go and grab the configuration file and apply it to the system. Get managed devices key. So what this does is that saves the key for this is the sort of the license management for the controller. The controller in its basic version comes with a license for 24 SDVoE endpoints. If you have more than that, then you need to obtain an extra purchase and a bigger license, as it were. And to be able to do that, then we actually need to get the key from the controller. Just email it to us, so we can create a device key to send back to you from tech support. It's very, very quick. It's just a simple email, so it doesn't take any time at all. And then you upload the managed device key, so we'll send you a file, the license file. You can just upload it to the controller. You can download logs, which is very useful for technical support. So the first thing that you would do if you do see something strange going on is to download the logs immediately, and you can email them to us. You can download the API documents. You can restart the controller. You can shut down the controller. You can do a factory reset of just the controller down here. And you can do a factory reset of the controller and all the devices, the TX and the RX as well. So that resets everything, the IP addresses and the whole thing. When you do a factory reset on the controller, it will set it back to the same state that it was when it came out of the box. So it's not assigned to anything. It doesn't have an IP address, and you'll have to go through the startup assistant to configure it and give it an IP address again. Delete systems configuration, that just deletes the whole configuration So, the layouts and the video walls, the arrays and so on from the system, it doesn't reset the transmitters and the receivers or the controller. So we're just talking about systems configuration here. That's what it is. And the last thing that I'm going to share with you today is users. So the default user is service, and so the service user, which is default, which is admin, and you can create, let's say, Nick. To create a new user ID, I'll go NW, password 1234. Actually, that's probably and A, B, C, D. I think it needs numbers and letters, and default user create. Okay, password policy, at least one special character. Okay, so let's do, so 1, 2, 3, 4, then A, B, C, lowercase d, and then that, and the same thing here, 1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, lowercase d, and then that. So now I've created a default user. Now, I'm not an administrator, so the only thing, so when you create a default a user like that, the only thing when you log into, when you open the Terra Manager software and you log in as a user, the only thing that you'll have access to is operation mode. The configuration tab, the global tab, and the user tab, you won't have access to. Okay, only administrators have access to all 4 tabs. Okay. And it's usually a good idea to create a second administrator user, as it were, with a different password. So if a password is forgotten or something like that, then at least you have another admin login to be able to use. So up here on the right-hand side, you can change the password for service, for the service login or whatever login you're actually using. You can sign out, and up here you can see the IP address that we're connected to. So it's the IP address of the controller, the number of devices that are actually connected to that the controller can see, and the number of devices that it's going to be able to manage. So it's a basic license for 24 endpoints. And you've got licensing information and help and so on, the different software versions on the manager and the controller, licensing. As it actually opens up a PDF with the licensing information, and you've got a help file as well, which opens up the user manual. So that's pretty much it, really, for the Terra Manager. So the advantages of the manager is that it's really easy to use. It's easy to update. It permits you to manage all the different Terra devices, or even I'm going to say the SDVoE devices, because everything is interoperable from a central point. So you can configure each device and reset them, update the firmware, and you can create and save layouts. And it's something in a lot of cases, in a lot of fixed installations that we've seen, the Terra Manager is used as an administrator tool, it's used as the main admin tool, and third party and users, sort of everyday users would use a third party interface using either Widget Designer or Crestron, something like that. Oh yeah, one thing I did wanted to share with you as well that I nearly forgot is this guy. So you may remember when in the global page I ticked the web server. The web server you can just use open a browser, enter the IP address of the controller, and what you get here is pretty much an XY panel that you can use to be able to switch different types of signal between inputs, which are transmitters, and outputs, which are receivers. Okay, so for example, if I want to take select HDMI or display port, so HDMI, and take input 1 and send it to output 2, then you just do that. And you can see the command here that it's sent over the network as well. Okay. You can do the same thing for audio. So now if I want to select just audio, so analog audio, for example, from input 1, but send that to output 4 only, then you can do that too. So notice that I've routed very easily. I've used this to route the video and the audio to different destinations. And to be able to see what you're doing, if you go to show mapping and select this guy, then you can see that the video is actually already routed to output 1, but it's also routed to output 2, and audio, which is white, is routed to output 4. And you can select on the top right-hand side, USB, RS-232 to the transmitter or to the RX. So you can choose which way that the signal is going, okay? And the same for infrared as well, to the transmitter and from the transmitter. You could clear all. It should clear everything. No, I mean show mapping mode. Okay, so clear all. Okay, so now nothing, if I go, nothing's being switched anywhere, and then I can go back and do this, for example, and then take this one here, and if I go back to show mapping, then you see the video from 1 is going to from input 1 is going to output 1, video from input 2 is going to output 2. And you can do the same thing for audio as well. Really simple to use. Section. You can lock an output, so you can't select. You actually can't route anything to it. So select that output, and you can unlock it, so you can use that output again. So it's very, very simple to use. So basically, what you're looking at is a matrix switcher that has HDMI, display port, audio, digital and analog, USB, RS-232, and infrared. So this particular interface just shows you how flexible the system is. You can do exactly the same thing using the API, using the JSON API. And on the subject of that, there's a second web page that you can use as well. So again, you enter the IP address here, and you've got JSON test up here. And then you can go down and select a command and switch KVM, for example, from the device So I'd actually so here you'd enter the device ID, which is the MAC address of the transmitter, and you'd enter the MAC address of the receiver, and when you hit send, you can see here the parameters of the command that you would be able to use on your your third-party interface. So that's what it would look like in its raw form. So that's what the code would actually look like when you're programming it. That's what it looks like in a parsed form. So this just lets you sort of test commands over the network. Very easy to use. So that's pretty much it, sort of for the Terra controller and the Terra Manager software. So as we said before, the performance and scalability and affordability of Terra and SDVoE is to be honest, actually fantastic too. So you get the same quality and latency as a traditional matrix switcher. But you've got a lot more flexibility, you've got more functions. And I said before in the previous webinars, we really think that SDVoE is the future for video over Ethernet, and it's going to replace the standard matrix, the audiovisual matrix switching. And just to finish up today's presentation, I just want to remind you that Christie is a total solution house. We do offer everything you need between source and display. So, Pandoras Box media servers, Terra for the signal transmission, video processing, Terra and Phoenix. Sorry, so that should actually be Spider X80 and Phoenix. Displays in form of video projectors, flat panels, and LED walls, which have been known for many years now. So we can offer you a total solution, and we'll adapt that solution depending on the on the projects that you have, and so on. So, Tom, I think it's questions next. How are we?
First of all, less questions than in the last two webinars. This is absolutely for sure.
Okay.
Yes, let me directly jump in a question for Mario. Can you show again how we can recall the presets? The presets are the layouts. How we can recall the layouts, and maybe you can explain a little bit more on what possibilities there are to trigger the layouts from external. So of course within Terra, but is it possible to trigger separate layouts from third-party devices or other software products?
Yes, it is. I mean, there is a command for that. Now, internally, if you're using the Terra Manager, the recall layout, you can see the list here that I've got. And you can just select the one that you want to use and hit apply. Now I'm using preview mode, so now you've got TX2 to full screen, and I'm just going to push that to display. So yeah, I've just recalled that particular layout, or you can call them presets pretty much. So that's the way that you do it in using the Terra Manager. And by the way, you can see these little icons here. You can see what's actually being switched, okay, on the receiver. So if you go down here onto the let's go back to the transmitter. It's in new group, TX2. You can see TX2, everything is ticked down here. So you've got video obviously being routed to the display, but you've also got audio. You've got infrared, RS-232, and USB. And you can see the red cross here. You can cut that at any time as well. So you have live control over what's going on. Now, to finish up with that question, if we go back here to the JSON API, you can let's see, switch. There is a control. There are all the controls, but apply layout is the one that we're talking about. So you get the layout ID. So this is the the code that we use for a third-party device, and the layout, apply layout, and you can, I think there's a get layout. Yeah, you can apply layout by name or by its ID, and I'm expecting it gets. They're not all here. There's a get layout by the. Here we go. Get layout counts by name by ID. So you can use this command here to go and get a list of different layouts. And then you can use the get apply layout or apply layout by name to send a command to apply that layout to the video wall. So I hope that sort of explains. I hope that answers that question. Again, you know, there's a comprehensive user manual for the JSON API and the XY switcher. So that's sort of the reference manual for that. Again, you know, this all the commands aren't here. This is just the API test to be able to just make sure that you know, the JSON commands are actually being sent correctly over the network, and it gives a few examples. It also helps and gives you a few examples of what needs to be done.
I was hoping for that you talk a little bit more about the widget designer, because here are coming questions in how can we create easy user interfaces to switch layouts, something like a touch screen, or even from a mobile device in a control room environment, for example. How can we create an easy interface to switch between different layouts?
Yeah, I mentioned. Yeah, you're right, Tom. I mentioned that you know, third-party control. I think the API for widget designer, of course. I think that'd actually be a good idea for another webinar. Widget designer specifically for Terra systems, because there is a plugin, a Terra plugin for widget designer, so all the commands are already there. So I think that would be a really good subject for a webinar specifically for that. So widget designer is probably one of the best products that Christie has. It's a fantastic piece of software. For those that you don't know what widget designer is, it's a software that creates an interface between not only the user and Pandoras Box and Terra and any of the Christie, pretty much any of the Christie products, but between devices as well. So it's an interface between third-party devices, you know, close contact stuff or infrared stuff, or you know, laser devices and stuff like that, and anything else. So Tom, you can talk more about that than I can, so you should be doing that. You should do a webinar specifically on.
Yeah, we will.
On.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Talking about widget designer, we definitely need quite some time to go through the possibilities. But the thing is, how to control the Terra Manager software from an easy interface was just a question popping up a couple of times. So I wanted to bring it.
Yeah.
Bring it
so
up.
I mean.
Yeah.
So one last thing is that, you know, the Terra Manager, you need the Terra Manager to be able to set the system up. Once you've got the system set up, the Terra Manager doesn't need to run if you're using a third-party control. So if you're using widget designer or a Crestron interface, and there is a Crestron plugin for that as well if you need, if you want that. Once you've programmed your widget designer interface or your Crestron interface, then you actually don't need the manager to be running at all.
Okay.
You'd only use the manager as an admin tool to update the devices or the controller or whatever.
Before more questions are coming in, let's be precise. The Terra Manager is the control software to control the controller of the Terra system. You can get the Terra Manager out of the system, but you need to keep the controller in the system to operate and to talk.
You still need the controller
through third party.
Yeah.
Because there was a question.
You're absolutely right, Mike. You still need the controller. The controller holds the layouts, the system's configuration and everything. So the controller is the heart of the whole system.
But to be clear,
the only sort of situation where you would not need a controller is if you're just doing point to point between the transmitter and receiver.
And because this was a question that came up during the webinar, of course you can disconnect the controller from the system, and the system will keep on doing. It will keep the routing, it will keep the layout, it will keep the current status. You will not be able to change anything. Is that right?
That's correct. So if the controller gets disconnected, either from power from the network, the devices themselves, the TX and the RX, just continue working. So the video keeps flowing. You just lose control, as it were, of the transmitters and receivers, but the transmitters and receivers, will be in the same state, exactly the same state. When the controller goes offline, or if the controller should go offline, so nothing changes.
Another interesting question, talking about the X and Y panel, which is kind of matrix switch mode. Can we create layouts in the X and Y panel, or how is the X and Y panel
right now
to the layouts in the Terra Manager? That was another question coming up.
Okay, they're not connected to the layouts in the XY panel, and the layouts are not connected. The XY panel is just like a matrix switcher interface for the system. You would use pretty much the same commands in the JSON API to switch different sources, different destinations. Then we're using with the XY panel. You have exactly the same functions. Okay, so the JSON API is what you would use really to use the system. The layouts are completely disconnected from all of that, from the XY panel.
Yep.
If that's clear.
Yep, I think so. Sometimes the question comes up talking about limitations on limitations of Terra. What I always say is the limitation is the number of ports you have. Especially now talking about the Terra Manager, maybe we have to make it clear again that there are several licenses within the manager with a number of devices that can be controlled with a certain license. When people ask about limitations inside the Terra Manager, there are different level of devices.
Yeah. So physically there are no real limitations. The limitations is really the number of ports available on the network. So it could be hundreds or thousands of ports. In terms of licensing, there are different license levels. So the basic license, if you, get a controller, like the standard license is for 24 endpoints. And then I think it goes from 25 to
56 or something, 96.
I think it's 96 or something.
96 probably.
So there are different levels, and then you've got the biggest license, which is 256 and above. So there's no limit. So that there's the size of the system really can be anything you like. I mean, that's the beauty of this thing is you can build your matrix switcher, sort of which is pretty much what it is. It's a network-based matrix switcher. Okay, that switches audio and video and USB and infrared and RS-232 and so on. You can build it any size you like, and if you need to increase the size of your setup, then you can do that. And you can add a license. You can increase the size, the type of license that you have. So at any time. So that's the really cool thing about it. There is really no limit. I mean, what we're using is a standard network device in the form of a switch as a matrix switcher, and a switch or a switching system, a network switching system, can be any size you like. And it's flexible, so you can add as many ports to it as you like.
Maybe once again, can you please explain once again how to get to the X and Y panel website? Which IP address do you have to type in? What is the IP address for the JSON test API? To get in there.
Okay, so first things first.
Yep.
Yeah. So first thing, you need to go to the global page and just make sure that this here, the web server, is ticked. So you've got the XY HTML ticked, and obviously a JSON API tester ticked as well if you want to use that. So by default, all of this is unticked. So the first thing that I do, when I configure a controller, out of the box, is just go straight to the global page and tick everything that I need here. So the JSON API, so the standard thing is the JSON API, the web server, so we can get the JSON API tested and the XY HTML page, and also VNC, so that if we need to, then our technical support teams can VNC into the controller if you need help on that. So once you've done that, then you just save changes, and the controller is going to reboot itself and activate the web server. So once you've done that, then you just go to you open a browser and enter the IP address of the controller, and this is what you get. So you've got inputs, which are the transmitters, and you've got outputs, which are the receivers, and you just choose, what you want to switch and where you want to switch it very easily. And just as a reminder, the JSON API test is, it's the the IP address of the controller / JSON test. To get to that. Any other questions, Mike? No audio, I'm afraid, my friend.
I have to unmute my microphone and don't make them crazy out there. I'm still Tom. So there were some other questions.
Oh, sorry.
No problem, I may. There were some other questions coming in, especially when you talk about the Multiviewer, talking about bandwidth problems. Maybe you can explain once again, when you take a look onto the Multiviewer, why we recommend to use an HD screen to display a Multiviewer better than a 4K screen, just by taking a look onto the size of the different Multiviewer sources. Maybe this is something we can get a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. So let's go back. Let's go back to Multiviewer 2 here and apply that in the manager software. Okay. So we've got this going, and I've got a Multiview up here. So I'm going to enter that. So the reason for recommending using HD outputs for the Multiviewer is simply due to make sure that the window size within the Multiviewer, especially when you're using UHD and 4K sources, okay, connected to a transmitter, are small enough to be able to fit into that, what's left of the bandwidth on the transmitter. Okay, so you have to remember that on the transmitter has a maximum output bandwidth onto the network of 10 gigabytes, and it will prioritize the native video resolution on that bandwidth. Okay, so if the video input into the transmitter is HD, then it's going to allocate the first, it's going to allocate, that amount of bandwidth to the native resolution. And HD, that's about 3.5, 3.6 gigabytes. So it will allocate 3.6 gigabytes of bandwidth to the video in its native uncompressed form. When you get up to UHD and 4K, then, as you increase the input resolution to the transmitter is going to allocate more and more bandwidth up to a maximum about 8.5 to 9 gigabytes. Okay, so when you're using UHD and 4K, then you're using the maximum bandwidth that SDVoE will allow, which is about 9 gigabytes, and you've only got a gigabyte left for everything else, and that includes stream 1. That includes stream 1. So even though stream 1 is half the frame rate, when you're using UHD and 4K, the window in the Multiviewer needs to be small enough to fit into like maybe 1 or 1.5 gigabytes. Now, to make sure that happens, then using Multiviewer in an HD resolution sort of forces you to do that. Because even if you're in a quadrant, if you go back to Multiviewer 1, for example, I think we'll be able to, let's leave Multiviewer. Okay. No, that's not what I want to do. Let's do this. So enter Multiviewer. Let's clear all the sources, and I'm going to go to a 2x2 grid. Now, I'm looking at a single receiver here in a 2x2 array Multiview mode. Now, if this was a 4K display, not a 2K display, each of those quadrants would be 1920 by 1080, right? So 1920 by 1080, even half the frame rate, is still at least 1.5 gigabytes. Okay, remember 1920 by 1080 in full frame rate is 3.5, 3.6 gigabytes. You half the frame rate, you half the bandwidth. So if the source is UHD or 4K, which is already using, maybe up to 8.5 or 9 gigabytes of bandwidth, and you have a stream 1, which is 1920 by 1080, there's every chance that it will be over. It's not going to like it, and you'll see artifacts on the screen. So, however, if your Multiviewer is in HD, then each segment, let's take a transmitter down here and just drop it into this thing here. Each segment of the quadrant is only 960 by 540. Now that fits a lot better into that 1 gigabyte or 1.5 gigabyte bandwidth that's left when you're using UHD and 4K. So that's why we sort of recommend using HD for Multiviewer rather than 4K, just to make sure that you have the freedom to be able to use it rather than have to think about, okay, I've got a 4K source, so I'm not going to be able to use 1920 by 1080 on a Multiviewer that's in 4K, so I need to make it smaller and so on and so forth.
All right.
I hope that answers the question.
That absolutely answers the question. So to turn it into other words, there's a high chance that you will not use every native pixel of a 4K display in Multiviewer mode to show all your sources. There's a high chance that you will have a lot of black gaps between the sources because the bandwidth of the transmitters doesn't provide as many bandwidth for the stream 0.
Yeah, I mean the signal's going to break up. If it tries to output too much, then you'll see it break up on the receiver end. Now, likewise, if you try and oversubscribe the receiver also on the Multiviewer has the maximum of 10 gigabytes bandwidth coming in. So let's go back to this setup down here, Multiviewer 2. Okay, let's go back here. I need to set this up. Okay, so we've got this going. So, okay, into Multiviewer, so we're back here again. So in this layout, the receiver, like I've just said, you've got a maximum input bandwidth of 10 gigabytes. So the sum of each of these windows, and this is just switch back. Let's keep undo snap to grid. I just changed the segment size. So the sum total of the number of pixels of each of these windows, of all the windows on the Multiviewer, must fit into 10 gigabytes. So rule of thumb, take the width and the height of each individual window. Okay, so width times the height gives you, the number of pixels that it's using. Okay, add them all up for each of the windows in the Multiviewer. If that fits into 4K, so 4096 by 2160 in terms of number of pixels, you're good to go. That's a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yep. Honestly, Nick, that was it. That was it for the questions. If you want to,
okay.
Is it possible? What would happen? What would happen if you would drag TX2 in this Multiviewer another time, in a different size, for example?
Oh, so you can only, so what would happen is if I dragged TX2, actually, this isn't going to show up actually in the software, but it would on the screen, okay? So what would happen is, let's drag TX2 down here, for example. So there is so you get a warning.
This is what I wanted to see.
Because there's a scaling restriction because TX2 is already being used, okay, at a certain size, okay? And you're going to have a problem. Now, what the problem now is, because I've just dropped TX2 into this quadrant here that is 960 by 540, in this segment of TX2, you'll see the signal in this quadrant, in this part of this window, but the signal is going to be broken up all around it. Okay, so what happens is, what happened is when I dragged TX2 into the Multiviewer a second time at a different size, the system got TX2 to change the resolution, to change the resolution of stream 1. Okay, so you would see signal breakup on this guy, on the first sort of window, or the bigger TX2 window. And that's why, the warning comes up, just to warn you that there's going to be an issue, or that that particular source is being used elsewhere in the Multiviewer at a different size. You notice that when I dragged, multiple sources into the multiviewer at the same size, I didn't get that error message because they were all the same size. Okay, TX2 was always the same size, and TX3 was always the same size, even though I was using them multiple times. So you don't get that warning. That warning will only come up if you try to use a stream 0 from a single transmitter in two different sizes in two different multiviewers, or even in the same multiviewer, as just happened now.
All right. I think that's it. We've been through the JSON API website again. We talked about how we can create user interfaces. This is another JSON question which got answered. We talked about the X and Y matrix tool.
Yeah.
Is there a command list for widget designer? A command list for widget designer. I think this probably is a question for the widget designer or Pandoras Box support team. But does to control Terra through an external, let's say through the widget designer, one more time, do we have to enable something in the Terra Manager global page? For the X and Y panel, for the JSON API,
I think you need to enable the JSON API.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Changing passwords.
It's the same thing for Crestron too. You need to enable the JSON API for Crestron as well. And yes, again, widget designer includes all of the Terra commands that are available. That they're already in widget designer. You just have to go and pick and choose which one you want. It's already included.
There was another question.
So there's virtually no coding to do at all.
Another question came in if we can have a playlist of different layouts. So what I understand is an automated event scheduler or something like that that is changing different layouts on a video wall or on a Terra installation. I already answered this question by text. There is nothing like that in Terra directly, but we talked about widget designer so many times. Widget designer definitely would have a solution for that, to create some kind of scheduler in the widget designer that is forcing the controller to change the layouts at a certain time, or interactively if somebody is triggering a sensor that Terra is switching the layout. All these kinds of stuff is definitely possible if you include the widget designer.
And rather than recording, so you can do that with layouts. Get third-party controller to recall layouts on a every X after a certain amount of time, so you can get layouts to loop each other very easily. But more to the point, you can actually assign a source to a layer, so a transmitter to a layer. So you can get sources to change within a layer on the screen, within the layout as well, like that, using widget designer and using the JSON API. So if you're in a control room and you have a layout on the screen with a window top left, and you want the source to change every 15 seconds or something like that, for example, in that layout, in that window, rather than recording a new layout every time to do that, you can get the system just to change the source within that window every 15 seconds or however long you want to wait.
All right. I would have a last question. I'm not sure if we really can answer it, but I really like the idea behind it. Asking about the swapping of devices in a control room environment. Can this be done automatically? Can the system check and automatically find out if a transmitter or receiver is failing and swap out the unit automatically?
Yeah.
I can understand
No,
and like the
that's a
idea.
really cool feature request.
That's
But
it.
here's the thing. Well, the answer's no. And thinking about it, it would be pretty difficult. So you've got to remember that a TX is connected physically to a source, and an RX is connected physically to a display, right? So if you want to swap out a device, then you would have to physically go and connect, the source to the new transmitter that you want to, put into the system, or the display to the receiver. You'd have to go and physically connect those. So it's sort of, it would be difficult to do. I mean, it's interesting request, to do automatically, but the fact that each of these devices, the TX and the RX, are physically connected to something means that you would have to go in and do it manually anyway.
And this is what makes it a little bit funny, because imagine you have a matrix switcher before the Terra system, so that you can route by software the input signal to another transmitter. But this is bringing the whole idea of Terra and switching it,
but that's
making it completely
mind-blowing. I mean, yeah.
That's it. It's just no way. Just no way.
That would be a huge expensive thing to do for something that you would only do once in a blue moon. So yeah,
absolutely. Nick, thanks a lot. I'm finally checking if there's another question has come in. Not so far. I think we answered pretty much everything that came in.
That's great.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to listen to you once.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for attending these webinars. They've been really successful. Really happy with it. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know. We'll stay online afterwards. Let us know if you've got any questions, any remarks, anything that if there's other webinars like you'd like to see. And I think, Tom, it would be great to have a widget designer webinar specifically for Terra.
Yeah,
I think it'd be really cool. Yeah, so thank you all. We've been going on for quite a while, an hour and 52 minutes and counting. So, thank you for your patience. From all of us at Christie, we all hope that you're safe. We all hope that your families, and healthy. Stay safe. Hopefully we'll be out of this
mess,
this confinement thing very soon. It looks as though the situation is getting a little bit sort of improving here in Europe anyway. So, yeah, stay safe, people. Have a great day, and we'll keep you updated with other webinars on Terra that we'll be doing very shortly. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody. Cheers. Did you stop the recording?